Hey, Aharon Rabinowitz here for Red Giant TV. And in this episode of Red Giant TV, we're going to recreate the opening of that classic 1980s sci-fi show, Cosmodius, the Galaxy Explorer. You know, it was that show that starred a talking spaceship, and I think there were also some people on that show too. One of them was one of the actors named Rex Walker, and there was a leading lady, Dana Danning, or something like that. It was like totally rad. Not ringing any bells? Well, fair enough. It never existed, but it could have, and if it did, that probably would have been the opening graphic. Anyway, I was recently inspired by this video that was posted by Trapcode creator Petter Norby. He also followed the video up with a great tutorial breaking it down, and had some great advice for creating realistic wisps of cosmic gas. But realism? Psh, this was the 80s, dude, and we're going for over-the-top classic retro style. Now, I started this project by grabbing some images from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory website, where they have tons of free images that you can use in your work. And, you know, after that, I kind of headed over to YouTube and watched the opening titles for shows like Airwolf, Automan, and Street Hawk. Good stuff. Okay, so let's get started. So here I am in After Effects, and I'm going to take my NASA image PIA15079.TIFF. It rolls off the tongue. And I'm going to drop that into a 720p comp that's a little longer than 5 seconds. And rather than scaling this down, because it's quite large an image as you can see, I'm going to move this off into Z-Space. So let me just make this 3D, and I'll simplify that, and I'll send this back. Let's just go all the way out there, maybe 1700. Looks good. And I also want to just, at this point, scale it down a bit. I can use the keyboard command for scaling horizontally, which I believe is Command-Alt-Shift-H on the Mac, Control-Alt-Shift-H, I guess, on Windows. Something like that. There may have been an extra button in there, but that pretty much did the job. And that makes it fit horizontally. It scales it all down so that the horizontal stuff is right at the edges. And there we go. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is add in a new solid, and then we're going to put Trapcode form on that. So layer, new, and solid. And it doesn't really matter the color, but I'll just click OK as long as it's the same size as the comp. And I'm going to choose Effect, Trapcode, Form. Can't see it on your screen, but I definitely did click that. Anyway, with that done, we're going to get to work here. So for starters, the base form, which is the size of and the shape of form, we're going to keep it as box grid. But for the size X, we're going to go with something really big, 1700. And how do I know these numbers? Because I've been working on this project for a while. Size X is 1700, and the size Y is going to be something like 2200. We just really want to get it nice and big. And this is okay, except what we really want to do is have the gas sort of coming towards us. I want to rotate this 90 degrees. Take a look so that the stuff is coming out towards us in this way. And also, I'm going to get rid of the particles in Z except for the one layer, so we'll just choose one. And now we've just got this sort of straight looking area here. And, you know, I'm going to be using a cloudlet particle, and Petter covers in his tutorial on using actual images from clouds to use as sort of the gaseous shapes. I'm not going there in this one, as I mentioned, but we'll start right now with just using these spheres and kind of work our way back to getting the gaseous shapes, the basic ones that Trapcode Particular comes with. So we've got these, we've got this form here, and what I also want to do is just bring up the number of particles at this point. Particles in X, you know, we'll bring that to, I don't know, 140, and particles in Y will go with, you know, 95. One of the reasons I want to use the shapes that we're using, basically the spheres, is because it really creates very little overhead for particular or form when you're working in either of the two to create these. It's when you start working with imagery. And, you know, the cloudlets, while not really being imagery, are some kind of imagery that's being pulled. So this will help definitely keep the overhead down while you're working. Anyway, that said, let's get our particles displaced and pushed out into space. So we're going to go into Disperse and Twist right here. Let's go down, and I'll bring this up. I'll bring Disperse up to about 320. That really brings our particles out a lot. And for the sake of just looking at this stuff, let me bring the size of these particles up. We'll come back into our particle settings here, and again, I'm going to keep the spheres for now, but I'll bring the size up just so we can really get a good idea of what these look like. Something like that. And we've got the mount in space. We also want to use the fractal fields that are part of trapcode form, and also particular. We're going to use that to have it affect the size, shape, and position of these particles, just to create a more random feel. So we'll go into our fractal field area, and this is a very complex area, and I believe that Harry Frank will be covering it on an episode of Red Giant TV Live. By the time you watch this, he may already have done that, and it may be available on our site. But I know that he's covering that, and it'll explain a lot of how fractal fields work. Nevertheless, I'm going to get in here, and we're going to tell it to affect the size of the particles. Let's say, just give it like affect them, not much, just a tiny bit, 3, and we'll tell it to affect opacity, and let's give it also just a little bit of influence. Right, you're not going to see so much of it. If I were to turn this up, you'd really see it. But I know that I want to have just a minimal amount, and especially because later when I'm playing with the cloudlet features, you will see definitely a difference. And let's set it to displace these particles. So let's take a look here. Displace them. You can really crank that up, and lots of things will happen. It'll definitely move them around. Let's get this to it's about 100. Will do the job. Okay. And what will happen is if I do a quick RAM preview, you're going to see that the particles are moving, which I definitely do not want to have happen. Any motion that you're going to see in these particles are going to be created by the camera moving through them. And the reason that this is happening is because there's something here called flow evolution that's going. It's constantly shifting around the fractal field, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to set this down to 0. And that should solve the problem. So let's take a look now. All right, looking good. So now I want to jump back into the particle setting and change the particle type from sphere to cloudlet. And with that done, I'm going to set the opacity down to 1. And you know what, maybe even 0.5. It's minimal. It's a minimal difference, but it definitely is there. And if you can go even lower, you might want to do that, because this stuff is going to start, when we use transfer modes to bring this together, it may start to make everything glow a bunch. All right, the size isn't quite right, so let's bring the size up. Let's go to 60. Now, what just happened is that you're seeing all white because I brought the size of these particles up a ton, and they're overlapping each other. We need to do stuff here to make the particles, even though opacity is set to 1, it's a lot of particles. So what we need to do is actually work with the color here, and that will help us in this process, because if we bring the colors to a dark color, they'll start to become individualized again. So I'm going to go into my layer maps, actually my quick maps here, and I'm going to use for the color map, I'll twirl this down, and we're going to get rid of most of this stuff here. I really just want to have an orange in there. And it's going to be a dark orange to boot. So we're pulling this out, and let me double click on this, and we'll make this a deep orange, almost red, getting closer to red there. And I'll do a second one, and this one is going to be even darker. And then I'll tell it to map. We can go over X, we can go over Y. I'll just go with radial. And as you can see, we're starting to see some result. It's very bright though. One thing I want to do is set the cloudlet feather up to 100. As you can see, that will bring down some of the opacity as well. In addition, the transfer mode right now is set to add. I'm going to bring this over to screen, which ends up creating a lot less of that brilliant light when they overlap. Okay, definitely looking better. Okay, I'm also going to jump back into the opacity here, and I'm going to set this down to something really low, like 0.1. Also, I'm going to set the size random up to 100. That means we're going to get some very small particles. And finally, probably the most important thing is to work with the blending modes. You can try something like add, but that's probably going to be way too much, really too bright. So I'll set this to, again, to screen. And That definitely brings it out. So now we can see our background mixed in with our particles. The next thing I want to do is rename this black solid to cosmic gas. I can't tell you how many projects I have that have like layers named black solid or red solid that give me no idea of what it does. So I've really, over the years, tried to get very organized and name these things so that we don't get confused. We are going to have several other solids in here as well. So we'll call that cosmic gas, and then we are going to also add in a camera, and it'll be a 35 millimeter. That looks great. Click OK, and that should change a little bit the way the particles are being shown. Okay, now I just realized something as I did that, which is my particles changed the way they look, but the background didn't. And if you're adding a camera, the whole perspective should shift at least a little bit. And things did not change in the background, which leads me to believe that something's not right here. So let me just quickly check the position of this layer. And, ooh, you know, remember when I had moved that all the way into Z space at 1700? I guess when I did that that command to make it fit the horizontal dimensions of the screen, it moved everything back in Z space. So let me set this 1700 all the way back. And as you can see, that's gotten quite small. So let's, I'm going to scale this up to fit the horizontal dimensions here, just like that. And that's what I should be seeing. So now if I move the camera in 3D space, well, you can see we're moving through the gas, and our background is moving forward, but it's much further away. The one thing is, though, that I see here is that the stars that we've got back there, they're, you know, this is some kind of star nebula. It's full of stars, but we're not seeing any stars moving forward. They're all far in the distance, and all we're seeing is this cosmic gas. So I'm going to add in a new layer for star stuff. Layer, new, solid, and I will name it star stuff and make it the comp size, and I'll click OK. And we can move that below the camera. And we can choose effect, trap code, form. We're going to go pretty basic here. So we'll set the size of the base form, set that up to 2000, and size Y, we'll set it to 2800 to bring the stars forward. We're also going to have to rotate this on the x-axis again like we did before. And we're going to set the particles in Z to just the 1. And we're going to choose particles in X to 10, and same for Y. We really don't need a lot of these. With that done, we're going to start getting into our particle settings here, and I'm just going to quickly change this from sphere to star, no depth of field. And we'll set the size to 5 or maybe 6 even. All right, and we'll set their opacity down a bunch, bring it to like 30. And there's some settings here for the star, and you've just got to go right here for glow. And we'll set the glow size to about 180. And we'll set the opacity to about 75. So we got a nice glow going on there for the stars. Another thing to look at is I want to change the colors of the stars a little bit. So let's get into the quick maps. And I'm just going to use two very basic colors, the orange and the blue that we've got in our background image. So let me go for color map. Let me just really get rid of everything except two of these. And I'll double click. And I'll go with an orange. That's very similar to what we've got here. Maybe a little more into the white. And then I'll do the same for this one. I'll make it a blue. Let's just go with a pale blue. And we'll map opacity and color over radial. Won't really matter too much because we're going to disperse everything here as well. So let's get into our disperse and twist. And we'll set the disperse up a bunch, 650. And that gets our stars out there. I think that's looking pretty good, although obviously when I get a transfer mode, I'm going to set this to add, and that creates some very bright looking interesting stars. And now as we move forward in space, you can see we've got our stars moving with us. Alright, now that I got a bunch of stars in there, I want bigger stars. I mean, Tom Cruise big star, like a giant red no, not going to go there. I just want some big stars in there, just 2 of them to help create the feeling of ginormousness in the vastness of space, or really just the cool factor, honestly. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a couple of lens flares, and we're going to use null light factory and null 3D flare. So for null 3D flare, we just need to use lights as locators. I'll choose layer, new, and light. And I'll click OK. It doesn't really matter what kind of light they are, because we're going to be using the light not to cast any kind of light or shadows, but just as a locator for the 3D flare. I'll click OK. And you can see that it affected the background image a bit, like the because it's a 3D layer. So I need to go into my background image here and hit AA to reveal the 3D properties. And I'm going to turn off accept shadows and accept lights. So now the light won't affect it at all. And we're going to select the light again, and what I want to do is move it all the way back, as far back as the big image goes. So actually I got to select my background image again and hit P for position, and I'm going to copy that position value, and I'm going to paste it onto the light. And once I do that, I'm going to move this up. You know what I'll do, just to make this a little easier, I'm going to solo my background layer and my light, and we'll just bring this back so that it's right about here. And we're going to duplicate this. Let's actually call this, we'll call this orange light, because we're going to use an orange star there. And I'm going to duplicate this and move this over so that it's about there. And this will be our blue light. So we'll call that blue light. And once we do that, I can turn this back on. I can unsolo these so that I can see things again. And I'm going to choose Window, Null 3D Flare. So I'm going to select my orange light, and I'm going to choose Create and Link Flare. So I'll click on Light Factory. And when I do that, it creates a new solid with a flare on it. And let's see what's going on here. Now, I can't see the flare right now because it's so far into the distance. I'm going to turn off use depth scaling, and that will definitely make it more visible. And I'm not a big fan of the default flare, so let's get in there and go into our options and make a change. Now, I could sit around here and try to create a great flare, use one of the default ones, but I'm actually going to grab something from Harry Frank's Guru preset called Cinematic Flares. So let me just get into there. Let me go into my Load button here, and we'll go into Harry Frank's Cinematic Flares, and I'm going to choose the one called Signals. Click OK. And I really like the way that looks, although the color's, a bit red, and I want an orange one, but we'll deal with that in a moment. I'll click OK, and that gives me a reddish kind of look to that. And what we're going to do is I'll tell it to use the color orange. It doesn't need to be so orange. Just somewhere a little, just a little more like that. I'll click OK. And I'm going to do the same with my blue light. Actually, let me just rename this to, this will be Orange Flare. And then I'll select my blue light, and again, I'm going to choose Light Factory. And we're not going to see anything again because we need to, again, just turn off use depth scaling. We don't really need it for this. And let me get into my options again here, and I'm going to load up the same flare. So it's going to be called Signals, again from Harry Frank's Cinematic Flares for No Light Factory. Click on OK. And from there, I'm just going to change the color of that one from white to a pale blue. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah. Something like that should do the job. And let's not forget to rename this to blue flare. Okay, now we're good to go. Next, I'm going to work on the text. And rather than working in the main comp where I've got all that overhead, I'm going to work in a separate composition. But rest assured, everything's going to be copied and pasted into the main comp afterwards. I just don't want that overhead. So let me get started. We're going to need to add some text, and I'll choose Layer, New, Text. And I'm going to be using a font called Laserian, and it's available for free online. I'm pretty sure that that I'm allowed to include it in the download for the project files, so it should be in there. But if not, I'll include a link to it. It's a free font that I found online. I'm just going to type in the word Cosmodius, and a couple of things are not right here. First is it's very, very big. So let's bring the size down to about 90. And let's also see, what I did was, if you look in the example, the text was much taller. So I really just scaled it up a ton. And let me do that. Let me bring it up to, let's go 210. That'll do the job. And I'm going to be creating right now the outline of it. So let me just set this to no fill. And for this, the color, I'm going to set this to a blue. And I'm going to set the stroke to 4. That should pretty much get me where I want to be. And the next thing for me to do is to add a glow. So we'll choose Effect, Stylize, and Glow. And not much of a difference there yet, but we'll get in there. So the next thing to do is we're going to set our glow threshold down a bunch. I'm going to set it to about 10%. And we'll set our glow radius to, let's go with something really high, like 18. And we'll also set the glow intensity up a bunch. And you know, even with all of that, I'm not loving the color as much as I thought I would. So, and you know what? Even with all that glow, I'm still not loving the color as much as I thought I would. So let me just change the color a tiny bit, move it down a little more. That should do it. A little bit more, just like that. Yep. Click OK. No reason to work at full resolution, but I always switch that over to half. And I'm also, even though we don't have any layers below it, we are going to need this to be using the add transfer mode. So I'm going to set this to add, and that gets our first of the text layers done, except now we need to animate it. And to do that, I'm going to use a text animator. So let me just get into my workspace, and we'll go Effects, and let's twirl down the animation presets. We'll go to the ones called Text, and from there, we'll choose the one called Animate In, and there's one called Typewriter. That's the one that I want. I could have just typed it up here, but you know, I wanted you to show you where it was so that you could also see where some of these effects are. And I'm going to drop this right down on Cosmodius. Now you're going to notice that we can't see anything, but if we scroll through time, our text types on. I'm going to hit U to reveal keyframes, and I'm just going to put this at the 1 second mark. So the whole animation takes 1 second, a quick RAM preview, and our text is typing on. And that's pretty good. But what I also want to do is use another copy of this layer to sort of drive the text on. It'll be sort of like a cursor. And back in the day, I remember when Tron was out and Automan, cursors were the big thing. So we're going to use a really cool bright cursor that's just going to be one letter at a time that will bring all this text on. So let me duplicate this layer, and I'm going to hit UU to reveal everything that's not at its default, and let me bring this up just so that we can see it. Things. Also, I'll select both layers of my text. I want to get this stuff centered. And now that that's done, we're good. Let me just get into here, and we'll look at this duplicate layer here. I am going to take a look, scroll down a couple of things. Range selector, so we can see that there's a start and end, and we've got our advanced settings here too. And the thing is, what's happening here is that you can see that the start is animating over time from going from 0 to 100%, so it reveals this text. And what I'd like to do is actually just get rid of these keyframes, and instead we'll do it like this. I'm going to solo this layer. We're going to animate the offset. So what I'll do is I'll create a very small area in which we're going to have this text animator affect the text. So let's say that we make the end is at 10% and the start is at 0. And what happens is you can see if I animate the offset over time, the text animator affects only what's in that area, and that's one letter. So what we'll do is I'm going to set this back to 0, and we'll animate this over 1 second, and we'll set the offset to 100, and that'll get us from beginning to the end. Of course, it's the exact opposite of what I want to do. I want to use one letter to reveal them, not make one letter disappear at a time. So what we'll do is, instead of using the add mode for in our advanced settings here, I'm going to set it to subtract. And now if we take a look, we've got it bringing our stuff on. So to make this a little bit easier to see, and let me bring everything back down here, I'm going to choose Effect and Trap Code Starglow. And in Starglow, we are going to set our preset from current settings to blue, and we're going to bring the threshold down a bunch, and that will allow more of the text to be used. And we're also going to set the streak length to 50, and we're going to boost that light a bunch as well. Even a little bit more, something like that. And that's looking pretty good. So with that done, I think we've got something we can look at here. And what we got to do is unsolo this. Looking pretty cool. All right, it's working for me. All right, I'm going to duplicate this text one more time, but I'm going to get rid of all the effects. So get rid of glow, get rid of star glow, and I'm going to get rid of the text animator as well. Let me solo this, so we're just working with this. Let's choose UU to reveal everything. Get rid of animator 1. And we're going to make some changes to the way that this text looks. First of all, swap this out. It really doesn't matter what color the text is, but I just need something in the fill area. So I'm going to choose Effect, Generate, and Ramp. And we're going to go with white for the top and purple, purplish blue, something like that. For the bottom, maybe a little more into the blues. Click OK. And what we'll do is we'll just, let me pull out here for a second, bring our start of ramp close to there, and our end of ramp close to the bottom, like that. And the next thing to do is just want to add a little perspective, kind of 3D extrusion. So really basic, Effect, Perspective, and Bevel Alpha. And let's just set this, let's get this to about -180 on the light angle, and light intensity, let's bring it up just like that. And I think that does the job. Let's take a look at it. Yeah, there we go. We can see a little bit better. So we've got some basic perspective. Maybe if I want to, I can try bringing up the thickness a little bit if I want to do that, and I'll just do it in this case. I'll bring it right there. So now we've got some perspective, and I took the idea. This came from a combination of Airwolf and Automan, kind of the way the text was done. So let's see how this looks in total. So what's going to happen is, let me unsolo this and bring back our black background. Turn this text off for now, just so we can see. We're going to have the text come on like this, and then almost immediately after, we'll bring this text on. So let me just trim that in there. And what we'll do here is we'll just add in Effect, Trap Code, Starglow. And I'm going to use, for this preset, I'll use white star. And we're going to do a 1, 2, 3 kind of thing where we animate the streak length over time. So I'll do right there, go a couple of frames in, bring the streak length back to where they were. Right, That should do it. And then a few frames more, and streak length is down to 0. So now let's see what that looks like. And you can play with the timing on that just to get it to where you want it to be. Maybe move this down a tiny bit. Looking good, and I may finesse that a little bit later. But in any case, the next thing, one of the things that was really popular back in the day was kind of a light sweep. So at this point, I'm going to choose Effect, Generate, and CC Light Sweep. And what this does, if you've never used CC Light Sweep, is it creates a sweep of light through the text, just like this. So what we'll do is we'll bring it all the way over here, and instead of going with sharp, we're going to go with smooth, just so you can see that it's going to create a much smoother looking sweep. And we've got smooth. I'll set the sweep intensity down to like 15, and just so we can see again, we're trying to just bring that down, and the edge intensity down to like 25. And so now it's a much more subtle sweep. Just like that. Alright, so let's animate that over time. And just about right after it appears, so let me set a keyframe for the center point. We'll get us down to just to the end here. And let's take a look at that. Yeah, I'm feeling the 80s mojo. I really am. And just to really bring it home, I'm going to add in some really like glam lens flares. So layer, new, solid. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set this to 720 by 720, just a square. And I'm going to choose Effect, Null Light Factory, and Light Factory Easy. And I'm just going to choose the one called Diffraction. And let's just get this to the center point. Just like that. Let me get in I really want this to be centered here. So, and if you want to do it that way, you can just go like 360 by 360. And that'll get us where we need to be. I'm also going to set its transfer mode to add. I'm going to bring down, let me just move the whole layer. So we're going to have it appear, let's say, on the S. And I've got to bring the scale down of this flare so it doesn't run off the edges like it's doing, just a little bit. Bring that down. And what I want to also have this do is rotate. So I'll hit R for rotation, and I'm going to add an expression. I'll hit Alt, and I'll type in time times 30. And just so you can see what happens here, see, it's turning just like that. Now, we're not going to see that flare the entire time. In fact, the only time we're going to see this flare is right when the sweep hits the S. So let me just move this out of the way for a second. So the sweep comes through, hits that S right about there. So let's bring this back, put it on the corner of the S. Let me just set this as its endpoint there. And let's hit T to reveal the opacity. Set that down to 0. And I'll move 1, 2, 3, 4 frames maybe. Bring it up to 100. Go down just a tiny bit. Set the opacity. Again, set a keyframe, 1, 2, 3, 4. And bring it down to 0. And let's see how that looks now. Great. So that's one. And let's just do a second one, because why not? Maybe on the S, right? When that sweep hits that other S. So let me just duplicate this and bring it to here and move that over this S right there. So now let's take a look at the whole thing. Oh yeah. Oh, I'm feeling it. Okay, now that I've got everything set up for the text, I'm going to hit Command A, select all, just twirl it all down, and I'm going to copy all of this stuff. And I'm going to jump into my main comp here, and I'm just going to paste it in. So let's just bring it right below camera here and leave it right there, just like that. And you know, I don't really want it to start at the first frame. Maybe bring it to, I don't know, go to like 10 frames in, and we'll just kind of move everything over here. So let's just do that. Cool. All right. So now that's ready to go. And something else that I want to do is over time I want to animate the camera moving in towards the background. So, you know, for that I'm going to shut off my cosmic gas just because it's the overhead is pretty heavy and I just kind of want to move through it. So let's take a look. Turn off my particles and let's go up to my camera here and hit P for position and just set a keyframe. And what we'll do is, you know, while we're at it, maybe just get ourselves down to the end here. So we'll just move all the way down in time. We can do this like that. And let's bring it home. And we don't want to get so close that we move through the background, but I do want my flare, that first flare, to go off screen. So that's good. And that should do it. Oh, but one thing I'm seeing is obviously the text here for Cosmodius is looking very glowy. I forgot that we have it set to the add transfer mode. So let me just set my last text. That's the regular text. We're going to put this on the normal transfer mode. So now we've got, you know, it kind of animates through. And I think I might need to do a little bit of retiming on this star and on the, you know, on the text animation, just a tiny bit. So because the star is still on the screen when we go to the end. I mean, you could just extend this whole thing a little bit, but I think let me just pull back a tiny bit. I think we can just make it start a little bit earlier. I know I said 10 frames in, but maybe we'll just go with 5. And we'll take all of this stuff, including this stuff right here, and we'll just drag it down. And that, hopefully, yep, that gets us to the end of that. Okay, so let's bring our particles back right now. Star stuff and our particles, and we may have moved in a little too far. I have to kind of do a preview at this point and just see how that's going, so let me do that. Now I've previewed at a quarter resolution at 25% just so I could make this happen a little faster. It's looking pretty good actually, although, you know, there's a couple of problems that I see, things that I especially with the text. You know, what happened was I was using the add transfer mode and I didn't really realize that when it pops on, you can see it in that first frame. So let me get over to that text right here, Cosmodius, and let me hit U to reveal the keyframes. And you know what? I'm just going to get rid of the this first frame where there's nothing. I'll delete that, and what I'll do is I'll hit T for opacity, and then U to reveal all keyframes, just so I can time this out. And I'll get it to make sure it's fully opaque by the time we're there. So set the first keyframe of opacity to 0, and the second one will be set to 100. And that looks a little better in terms of the build. But you know what? I think it's happening a little too slow. So I almost want it to be 1, 2, maybe 2 frames for that build. So let's take a look at that from right here. Maybe even just a little bit more. Let's see one more time. I think it'll do the job, especially after we add magic bullet looks and some other effects to help kind of bring all of it together. And there was just one other thing that kind of bugged me here, which was that the second flare, which I'm calling these disco flares in my head, comes on a little late. So let's just get that going. That'll be this one right here, and I really should name that layer. So let me just bring this back a tiny bit, right when it strikes. That's when that should happen. And let me call this Disco Flare 2, and I'll call this one Disco Flare 1. Okay. Looking good now. Let's do a quick RAM preview, finish it up. Yeah, much better. Alright, now this next part is going to be all smoke and mirrors. This is a Magic Bullet looks and some effects just to give it some extra something to help sell, the feeling of it being a little bit older. We'll change the colors a little bit. We'll get some saturation in. We'll also get some distortion from the lens, and then we're going to add in some stuff that'll make it look like it's really old. So first, let's. I'm going to move down here to right above my star stuff layer, and I'll choose Layer, New, and we'll choose Adjustment Layer. Of course, that is at the top. I don't know why I thought for a second that would appear right above it, but we're going to drop it down to right there, and we're going to call this Distortion. And let's just get into there. Choose Effect, Magic Bullet, Looks, and jump into Looks. And then we're going to click on Edit. Okay, and once we're in Looks, we are going to, rather than using a preset, because we're going to come back to presets in a little bit, we are going to do something else entirely. We're going to grab some tools and we're going to make our own little preset here, at least for the distortion and for something else we're going to add in. So move over the tools. I'm going to grab, let's just grab a vignette and go to town with that, because that's just the way we roll here. Bring this like this, and then bring this up. Just want some dark edges there, just like that. That should do the job. And that definitely gives it the feeling of a little more depth. And then also we want to add in a distortion, a lens distortion. Drop that in as well. And let's get this, let's move until we like where it's at. So I'm thinking like move it into the negative so we pull some stuff out, and then you can also flatten this out a tiny bit. Something like this, just a little bit. And that creates you'll see that as we move through, you're going to feel at the sides like we're almost in a tunnel. That'll do the job there. So let me click on Finished. Okay, so we're looking good here. And the next thing we want to do is add in another layer with Magic Bullet Looks. Now the reason that I wanted to do it that way and not just add looks on top of everything is because I very specifically wanted the distortion and the vignette to affect only our animated background. I didn't want it to affect the text, and I don't want it to affect our flares. So let's add in another adjustment layer. So Layer, New, Adjustment Layer. And I realize I didn't mention it before, and in case you're not familiar with it, an adjustment layer is a layer that affects every layer below it. So whatever effects you add to an adjustment layer, any layer that is below it will have that effect applied. So in the case of the vignette and the distortion, I only wanted it for all the layers that were below that layer, below this layer here, but I didn't want it for anything above that. So that's how we do that. And now I'm adding in this adjustment layer above everything, and I'm going to choose Effect, Magic Bullet, Looks, and we'll jump into Looks here. And here we go. Okay, and once we are in Looks, we're going to grab a preset this time. So there's a whole bunch of cool stuff in there. I mean, I've got a cool preset that I always loved was that I made called Green Glass, but that's not really appropriate. There's a whole bunch of cool things. You can really change the way things look. There's the classic blockbuster look and Ohio. But the one that I want, we're going to go into Stylized here, and I'm going to choose Gradient Deep Blue. And this is pretty good as it is, although I want to add in just a couple more things. And one of those is going to be, let's get into my tools here. I love using chromatic aberration. That separates some of the colors when there's sort of distortion at the edges of the lens. So I'm going to set that to, let's see how that looks with 1. And we'll send the blue-yellow into -1. And you can see that at the edges here, the colors separate. In the middle, you don't get that, but at the edges, you do. Back to that. And it helps. It helps sort of sell the oldness of it a little bit. And then with that done, I also want to add in one more thing, and that's just a little bit of edge softness. Not a ton, Really just want to keep it to a minimum, but just maybe just like that. And we'll also, here, let's do this first. Bring this down. And then bring this up like that. Really, really, really just the edges. Not even, I think. Yeah. Maybe bring that down a bit for the blur size. Maybe bring that to 1.5. Just so we have something at the edges, especially where the colors are starting to blend a little more. Okay. I'm going to click on Finished and get us back in. Okay, it's looking pretty good, and I want to just do a few more things to help finish off this project. First, I'm going to rename this layer to the look, so we know what that adjustment layer is for. And then I'm going to add another adjustment layer. Layer, new, adjustment layer. And we're going to add something called Magic Bullet Misfire. It's a great set of tools that ships with Magic Bullet to help create an old film look. So we'll choose Effect, we'll come Magic Bullet Misfire, and you can add them all individually, but if you want to add the whole gamut of effects at once, you can just choose Misfire. And let's quickly take a look. So we're going to add the fading, and we're going to add splotches and dust and some flicker, although the flicker, I know, happens a little too frequently and sometimes a little strong, but we'll set this to 25%, so it only happens every 4 frames or so. Micro scratches we'll add, and we'll add in some, not grain, because it's going to be kind of noisy. If we want to add in grain, most likely I would do it in looks, but I won't do it here. So we're going to apply deep scratches, and let's see, some deep scratches, should we go basic scratches? Yeah, these are just all things that add a little bit of something to it. Gate weave, which will make, it basically has to do with the film sort of moving over left and right. As the sprockets get a little bit bigger, the holes, where the sprockets connect to the film, so left and right. So this, we'll apply some gate weave, and I think let's see what it looks like if we add some post contrast. Yeah, that definitely gives it something. And now that's looking a lot older. And before I forget, I'm going to rename this to Misfire. And again, Misfire, Magic Bullet Misfire comes with Magic Bullet looks. I know I said Magic Bullet, but it comes with the suite, obviously, but it's part of Magic Bullet looks. Anyway, so with that there's just one more thing that I wanted to do. And, what happens is that as the camera moves to the end, to the end of its motion, and these flares are getting off to the side of the screen, I want to have the flares flare up at the edge of the screen. So let me go to my orange flare here, and we're going to tell it to use a feature that's called Use Edge Flare Up. And what we'll do is, let's just get ourselves closer to the end here. And I think I'm going to need to just bring that intensity up. Edge Flare Up intensity. Let's bring that up a lot. Alright, so it'll really flare up. And we can also scale the edge down a little bit, so it's as if it's reaching the edge a little bit sooner. And I want to do the same for the blue one. The blue one we should have almost no effect, but let me use edge flare up, and we'll bring up the intensity. And you shouldn't see much unless I scale the edges here. You might see it as we get to the end. So let's see, as we go, we might get a little extra flare. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how close you move, but that seems to do it. And that could be a little too intense. So, we can bring it down a little bit if we want to. I just want something to give a little extra oomph as it hits the edge of the screen. Alright, I think we have a complete project. Let's take a look. Alright. Looking pretty rad. Yeah. Anyway, I hope that it helps you in your work. Don't forget that you can download a free trial version of the software that I used in this tutorial at redgiantsoftware.com, and that you can get free presets for Red Giant plugins on redgiantpeople.com. And to keep up with the latest news about new products, new tutorials, tips, and deals, and anything, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or on our blog. Once again, I'm Aharon Rabinowitz for Red Giant TV. See you next time.